Hey guys, welcome back to Sunrise Basics. Today we're going to be going over a Texas rig, how to rig it, different things you can rig on it, different combinations of hooks and things you can do to it, everywhere from like beginner to advanced. You're going to tell you where to fish it and how to fish it, and stick around. Going to be a great episode, one of the most go-to baits around, and I think you're going to like this one. Let's get right into it. Alright, Texas rig. Very simple setup. There are a couple variations that I'm going to show you. This is what I do personally. Feel free to go out and explore. There's definitely different ways you can set these up. Different hooks, different weights, different combinations of baits that I don't use but do catch fish. Feel free to explore. It's one of those baits you can kind of customize to suit your needs and what you feel like catches fish. For me, this is what I feel catches fish. I'm gonna go through it right now. All right, to start off, to make a Texas rig, you need a couple things. The most basic things you need is a bullet weight. You need a offset worm hook, either a wide gap, a straight shank, or one of these straight flipping hooks that it's honestly a hook that I don't use too often. It's a heavy cover hook, and I know a lot of guys that swear by them. I tend to stick to the wide gap hooks. That's my favorite hook. Or if I have kind of a smaller worm, I will use a thin wire straight shank hook. So to set these up, what you're gonna do is the most basic setup. You take your line, and here's my line. You're gonna thread on your bullet weight and simply tie the hook to it. Okay, once your hook is tied up to it, it's gonna look like this. Now, what you're gonna do, so you're going to thread on the bait of your choice. I'm going to show you how to do that now. Okay guys, this is how you thread on a bait. You're going to take your hook and your weight. You're going to stick your hook right in the middle of that bait. Go down maybe a quarter of an inch and pop it out. And you're going to feed the hook down through it. When you get to your little offset, you're going to turn it, and it's going to sit in there real nice. Now what you're going to do, to get it to lay nice, you're going to take it, you're going to stick your hook through it, and when you get to this point, as you can see, this can still catch weed because your hook point's out. You're going to want to bury the hook point, so push your bait forward and a little bit onto that hook shank. And that's it. Easy as that, guys. Really basic Texas rig. This is what I learned to fish when I was learning how to throw a Texas rig. As basic as it gets, simply a weight, a hook, and whatever soft plastic you want to use, in this case a worm. Okay guys, so now that you know the most basic setup for a Texas rig, I'm going to show you a couple of add-ons that will either make it easier to fish or kind of add some flair to it. First thing being pegging your weight. What you're going to do is you're going to put on this little tiny rubber thing. It's going to keep your weight from sliding around. It's going to be less likely to get stuck, and it's just going to make it a lot easier and a lot more enjoyable to fish. So I'm going to show you how to do that right now. So to use a peg weight, what you're going to do is you can buy these. They're called literally called peg stops for Texas rigs. They come on a thing like this, or they come in little bags. Most of them come like this, and what you're going to do is there's going to be a metal loop on them. You're going to feed your line through the metal loop, and you're going to grab that little tiny black rubber piece, and you're going to pull it, and when you get to the end, all you're going to do is pull it through. So you're going to just keep pulling until it's onto your line. Now the big thing to do with peg stops are when you pull it through, because you're pulling it through a metal loop, you will get a kink in your line. As you can see, there's the kink. What you need to do is cut that kink off before you tie your bait. You don't want them there, that's bad line. This is what it looks like on the line. Next thing you want to do, all you gotta do is put on your weight and tie back on your hook. Alright? That peg is gonna keep your weight from sliding forward any. It's a great addition to your Texas rig. It's one of those small things that just makes this a lot easier to fish, a lot more enjoyable, and it will help you catch more fish in the long run. I can tell you that you're not going to be spending as much time pulling weed off of it or getting it unstuck. You're going to have a lot more time in the water. A lot more time in the water. A Texas rig's important. It's one of those baits that you're going to need to fish at a slower rate, so the more time you have to fish, the better. Next thing for improvements that you could do with a Texas rig, it's something that I do only every once in a while, and that is use a bead between the hook and the weight. Once again, all you gotta do is have your pegged weight all ready to go. And what you're gonna do is you're gonna take your beads. These come in a little plastic bag like this. You're gonna take your bead and simply thread it onto the line behind the weight. And once again, it's one of those things that just adds a little something to it. These come in different colors. This one happens to look like a fisheye. I also have ones that are straight black, depending on water color. I'll fish either one. But this is what it looks like, all tied up. So you get your peg, you get your weight, and you got your bead. So that is like the most advanced level of a Texas rig, in my opinion, that you need to worry about. Peg, weight and bead, a hook, and whatever bait you want. That's as simple as it is. Great technique to fish. One of the most basic techniques I use, and it's honestly probably one of the techniques that I use more often throughout the year than anything else. It's one of those baits that you can fish pretty much year round. And let's talk about next about what you can put on a Texas rig, because there's a lot you can put on. Okay, so in terms of baits you can put on your Texas rig hook, there are a lot of different options. Anywhere from craws to worms. Pretty much any soft plastic is game to Texas rig. In terms of a weighted Texas rig, we haven't even gotten into a Texas rig without a weight in it yet. We will get into that in another episode. You don't gotta worry about it for this one. It's a little bit of a different kind of fishing, so we'll leave it for the next episode or a future episode. Let's get into it. Craws. So I use 2 to 3 craws on average. I use the BizBaits Killer Craw. I use a BizBaits Cutter Craw. And I also use a beaver style bait, whether it be the Missile Baits D-Bomb or the Guggen Baits Bandito Bug. Both flat baits if I'm fishing super heavy cover. When I'm pitching this into logs or trees, I'm going to use one of those beaver style baits. It's just a little bit smoother, goes in a little bit better, it's a little more subtle. But in terms of craws, the reason I use 2 different craws is that the Killer Craw that you see right here, it has a little bit more of a subtle action. So what's great about Texas rig is that you can fish through a lot of different soft plastics, find out what the fish want. Sometimes the fish want a more subtle action as opposed to an action that's a lot more like exciting, you know, something that's going to really excite them. Sometimes they want it a little bit more slower and boring, essentially. They want boring. All right. Killer craw, got a little less action. It's a great cross made by Biz Baits. Next one is your cutter craw. Once again, made by Biz Baits. This one has a lot of action. Their appendages are a lot smaller, so they move around a lot more. This has become one of my favorite things to Texas rig, and it honestly will catch you a lot of fish. In terms of colors, if you're just starting out, you don't have the capital to buy a lot of different colors. I would recommend buying two colors. You want a green pumpkin and you want a black and blue. That's all you need. Those are the two most basic colors, and that's two colors you're going to use more than anything else. Obviously, the more you fish, as you fish certain regions, you're going to find that certain colors do better in certain areas. Where I am in Rhode Island during the months of July and August, there's a color called summer craw, which is a green pumpkin on top with a neon green on the bottom. Works fantastic here, but it's not one of those baits that I would use anywhere else really that often. So as you fish your area more, you'll start to learn colors that work better, and you can focus on those colors. Next thing you can put on are worms. There are three worms that I use on a Texas rig most often. First one being a trick worm, and then the next one is a Senko, and finally a curly tail worm. And this one happens to be one of the big curly tail worms. I'm going to go through each one. So if you're looking for a very underrated bait to Texas rig, trick worm, in my opinion, is one of the most underrated things to Texas rig. They are an awesome bait. They got a lot of action. They kind of come in a lot of different colors. I'd recommend getting Zoom black trick worms. If you want to see my buddy Marshall, he's in a lot of my videos. He catches a lot of fish on Zoom black trick worms. He swears by it. It's his absolute favorite thing to throw. And you know, he's kind of got me on him. If the water is very dirty, Zoom black trick worms is definitely something I go to. For whatever reason, in that dirty water, they like the subtlety of it, and you're very likely to get hits on that in dirty water. Next thing would be your Senko. This is when you're throwing something that you want to be absolutely 100% weedless. This comes in and out of weeds better than any of these other baits. This one is a Biz Baits Sassy Stick. It is a very subtle way to catch bass. You see it a lot in Florida, especially during the summer and springtime. It's just a great bait to throw. It's very subtle, pretty much no action to it. It literally just looks like a straight worm in the water. Last one. This one is a Magnum curly tail. It's a big worm, big bait that you can catch some big fish on, especially during the summer and fall in North Carolina. If you're in North Carolina, summer and fall, big curly tail worms work very well in deep water. They're a fantastic bait to throw. Once again, it's not something I'll throw in a lot of places just because of how big it is. But if you're in an area that you know has some big fish, this would be a way, certainly a way to go to catch them. Okay, everyone, let's talk about where you're gonna fish a Texas rig. Honestly, the answer is pretty much everywhere. Honestly, my two favorite places to throw a Texas rig are down weed lines. So if you're looking at the shore and you see weeds, you're gonna throw along the edge of the weeds, not into the weeds, along the edge of the weeds with a Texas rig. Great technique. Another thing that I throw into a lot is simply just throwing it into cover, whether it be logs in the water or trees, or like throwing against big rocks that are in the water. It's another technique, catches a lot of fish. It's one of the most basic techniques for a Texas rig, just because it does not get stuck in the in your cover or in the weeds if you're throwing along a weed line. But once again, honestly, it's one of those things that you can throw anywhere. You can throw this thing on ledges in like 50 feet of water. A lot of times, one of my most favorite things to do is to just go down the bank and just throw it at the bank and drag it back to you. You're gonna find fish that way. It's a good way to catch fish if you're trying to be a little slower. It's not one of the most fast techniques in the world. I'm gonna go over how to fish it next, and you'll understand why. But those are the two most common areas: is flipping into cover or flipping along the weeds or lily pads, whatever it may be. A couple areas that you want to stay away from. If it's incredibly rocky, like I'm talking like not just like one rock like in the middle of the water, I'm talking like a lot of rocks, I tend to shy away from the Texas rig. It gets stuck. Or if you're dealing with super thick weed, this will get stuck in very thick weed. You can't cast it into thick weed. That's a different technique called there's like punching, which is essentially looks like a Texas rig, but it's a very heavy weight. It's a lot heavier than what we use. So those are your most basic areas to throw it. Once again, it's a very versatile bait. You can really go and throw it anywhere. I would just stay away from those rocks, the super rocky areas. I also probably wouldn't use it if it's the middle of the winter. It's a little sketch on a Texas rig. If it's one of those warmer days during the winter, go for it. By all means, try it. But any other time, any other weather, you can really go out there and throw it. If you're dealing with darker water, so I'm talking about really dirty water, either brown, stained water, you're gonna want to go with a darker color. Go with either your blacks, your black and blues, either like a really deep red with like a blue flake. Those are all very good dark water colors. If you're dealing with a little bit clearer water, if you're dealing with like a natural pond water or ultra clear water, you're gonna want to use green pumpkin. Any variation in green pumpkin. Once again, move it around. Sometimes the fish will like something versus another thing. Most common occurrence of that is we were actually out fishing yesterday and we had the same thing tied on: green pumpkin, blue flake, green pumpkin, red flake, and it was the red flake that was getting the bites. Had to switch it, the blue wasn't doing it. So, you know, fish really are that picky sometimes. You really gotta change things up. That's what's great about a Texas rig, once again, is that you can go and change it a bunch of times, and it's very easy to change. You don't have to cut off the hook or anything. You just taking one soft plastic off, putting another one on. It's an awesome way to find fish and figure out what they're biting and tune in your technique for the day and how to catch them. Let's talk about how to fish these next. Most basic thing, you're gonna cast it out there, let it sink. It's not gonna take a very long time to sink, but you definitely gotta let it sink. You don't want to reel immediately. Let it sink. You're gonna want to point your rod at it, reel the slack out of it, and once you get a little bit of tension, you're gonna raise the tip of your rod up to about 12 o'clock, hold it there for a second, and then reel down to your slack. So don't reel the bait itself. You're gonna reel down to your slack, and then simply do the same thing. You're gonna take your rod and start pulling it up. You're gonna reel down to your slack. As you see some examples right now on the screen of how this is done. It's a very easy technique. Another thing you can do is vary your pauses. Sometimes when I toss that bait in the water, I won't move it for a little while. I'll let it sit there, and then I'll start reeling down to it, and let it sit there a little longer, and then I'll move it. A lot of times the fish will hit it on the initial drop. You know, it's very common for them to do that. I actually tend to find that I catch most of my fish within the first 5 feet of my cast, simply because I'm casting in an area that I want to fish, and once it's pulled out of that area, you know, the fish may not be there. Generally, something I tell people is that once you get off about 10 feet from the shore, unless you know that they're biting out deeper, a lot of times I'll just reel it in and make a new cast. I will cast at the same spot multiple times. Sometimes you gotta make the fish a little mad before they bite. And you know, it's just, you can play with it so much. That's what's great about a Texas rig, is that you can let it sit longer. You could try a faster lift, you could try a slower lift. But there's so many different ways you can fish it. You can simply just drag it. It's another technique that you can do where you cast it out there, let it sink, and then you can slowly, and I mean real slowly, crawl it back to you. You don't even worry about moving it, just real slow right along the bottom. It's another way you can catch them that way. Those are your two most basic ways to throw a Texas rig. It's worth learning both, but in my opinion, the lift and drop, that's one I'll do more often than not. As you can see, it's catching fish. I'm gonna overlay some video on this so you guys can see it in action. It's a great way to catch them. Highly recommend getting into a Texas rig. Let's talk about one quick little cheat that I'll do. It's fantastic. Kind of feel like not enough people do it, and that is using a spike it. Either a little tiny, you know, bottle of it, or I like to go with the spike it pens. What spike it is you can add a little flare to your Texas rigged soft plastic. If you're not getting the bites that you want, you think you can get more bites, you can take this. It smells like garlic. I believe they make it a couple different scents. It adds a little color, a little bit of scent to it. And all you gotta do is, like I said, this one, I'm gonna use the chartreuse on it. All you're gonna do is go over your worm in the back. With a crawl, you'll go over your appendages. All you gotta do, it's a nice little trick for a Texas rig to give it a little bit more, especially if you've been using a soft plastic for a little while. You lost that scent, you wanna give it a little scent back. You can put this on. It's kind of like my little cheat for you guys to try out. Spike it, either, like I said, they make little tiny bottles of it where you can dip your bait in, or the markers. Personal preference with the markers, they don't get everywhere if you forget to leave the cover off. Done that before by experience. Hope you guys catch them on a Texas rig. I really highly recommend using it. It's definitely a good technique to learn as a beginner, and it's definitely a good technique to master the further you get along in your fishing career. Appreciate you guys tuning in. Like, subscribe. Next video is going to be how to rig and fish a wacky rig. So hope you guys are looking forward to that. Stick around for it. It's going to be coming out here in a few days. And I appreciate you guys tuning in. I'll see you next time.